prime time, 5 o'clock, Croke Park, Saturday, Dublin against Donegal. So I suspect most people will tune in for that. Which brings us to the Dubs and Ger Brennan. So on last season, they've obviously lost Cluxton. He's still part of the environment. Lost Cluxton and John Small, and who else? That's it. On Dublin, right? Because we're talking there about 2-pointers. Can I just pick up where we left off, which was a bizarre exit to the championship when they lost to Tyrone by 7 points. And it was not just in this game, but it was particularly evident in this game. Their utter refusal to kick 2-pointers. And Dessie Farrell afterwards said, we just don't have the shooters. There was a moment where, like, Kieran Kilkenny, he was approaching the arc. This is Kieran Kilkenny. And he's like, I don't want to. Shit, I have to. And he skied it. It was like all composure was gone. It was very anti-Dublin. They never got to grips with the whole thing.
Even if you go back to the group, Dublin played Armagh in the first game, and they were done 3 times for not having 3 players up. And Armagh, if I remember correctly, kicked all 3 frees from outside. So they conceded 6 points to that. So if we're saying that Kerry were the team that figured the rules out the best, I think Dublin were the sort of elite county that didn't wrap their heads around it at all. It kind of looked like one last season from management and everybody else, and they were trying to just keep going, and they never really innovated in any sort of a sense.
The 2 shooters that you would think would be capable of 2 points, Paul Mannion, who drifted away after 2024, and Brian Fenton retired. Brian Fenton was so capable of kicking a point from that distance as well. They were the 2 that you would say. But even during their period of dominance, they didn't really score from long range. Everything was in. That was the systematic way they went. Fenton might have and Mannion might have come out and scored from distance, and maybe he was still inside the arc, but generally it was within that scoring zone, 20, 30 metres, and that was the system, and that's the system it felt like they were still playing. There were some really bad efforts at 2-pointers during a lot of their games, and I remember that against Tyrone. It was almost forlorn at the end.
There was a game
they were beaten 5-0 in 2-pointers in that final game.
That's right, they were. Yeah. There was a game or two before that. There was one game, maybe the 1-2 preceding, where they had about 4,000 wides. Like, it was just comical stuff. You couldn't get your head around what was going on. It was a particularly bad day, but it was just an odd Dublin season.
Now, a player I expect will come through once he's rested from Ballyboden is Ryan O'Dwyer. He looks capable on the basis of his club form of kicking 2-pointers. I think he'll be an asset. Whether he gets up to speed at that level, that's a different question.
I think Dublin have more 2-point kickers than they showed last year.
100%. Completely.
I think an awful lot of it was the fact that they didn't. Like, I remember that game against Armagh, where they had the 3-up breached 3 times. You were looking at Dublin players that were kind of trying to get on the ball and trying to shimmy into a bit of space along the D, whereas Armagh had. You could see they had like set piece movements to kind of get the ball here, then pop it out sideways. And Dublin seemed to have very little orchestration around how they were going to get their shooters in those positions in the first place. So I'm not sure it's as much about the skill set or the execution. I think it's a tactical coaching thing.
So based on what you saw at Louth, or based on what you know of them generally, or based on what you're hearing through the grapevine around town at the moment, what is the feeling on Ger Brennan's Dublin?
Well, I saw an interview with Greg McEnany saying we're going after 2-pointers more this year.
Oh, did you? Okay. Everything we said the last 5 minutes, it's fine.
But it's a big change, and they're looking. He was saying they hadn't tapped into the rules as much as they could have last year. To Conor's point, I mean, they had Farrell for 6 years, but Farrell was even a continuation from Jim Gavin. His main thing was not to mess this up, keep it going. The last All Ireland they won was the Last Dance, the real old school boys. Like, so that's 13 years of Jim Gavin and Dessie Farrell. It's a good time to have a new manager. It's fresh. They obviously have a fresh team, and I think that's going to help them now. Like, they do have the 2-point kickers as much as anybody else. Like, right there at the team, you can think of Howard. Kilkenny has it. O'Callaghan has it. McGuinness has it. Like, they have these players that can kick them. Ethan Dunn has it. Like, he's doing it for DCU, but I don't know if he's going to start the whole championship. But these players have it throughout the club championship in Dublin. But I think. Yeah, that's going to be one big improvement anyway, if they're actually buying into a new way of playing.
Like, they're kicking them in minor club games. Do you know what I mean? There's enough footballers in Dublin that can do this.
Where are they in quality at the moment?
I think they have a lot of 7 out of 10 players. What the 7 out of 10 players, if you consider that a lot of their stellar players from the last decade and a half were 8s and a lot of 9s even, I think they've a lot of players at the same level. But even looking at Dublin underage football in the last number of years, Kieran Kilkenny and Jack McCaffrey were being talked about from a long way off. Obviously, Paul Mannion, players like that. There's not really players that are being spoken of in the same vein in any way that have been coming through in recent years, and probably the results reflect that as well. So they've a lot of players of a certain standard. I think for Dublin to thrive, they need everybody right almost all of the time in terms of injuries. They've had a lot of injuries. Owen Murchan will disappear for weeks and months on end with an injury. I think the last 3 out of 4 years, Conor McKeon has been carrying issues. The 1 year he wasn't having an issue with an injury was 2023.
He didn't start against Tyrone.
He didn't start against Tyrone. In 2022, he missed the closing stages of the championship. So since 2021, we'll say 3 of those 4 years, they need him right. They need Lee Gannon. Came strong in 2023, but has had numerous injuries as well. So they have to have all of these players. Is Cian Murphy back? He may not be yet, but that's another player that came strong for a couple of years there, and then injury took him as well. So they can't really afford another year of O'Callaghan-led injuries.
I still think if Dublin had everybody available, I still think their attack is one of the top 2 or 3 attacks in the country, in terms of individual talent. Obviously, how you set them up and how you get them into the best positions and everything else, that's another thing. I just don't know. I couldn't. The 4 of us could pick a Dublin midfield pairing, and we could all pick different ones. And by the time championship comes around, it could be a completely different pairing. And we obviously don't know who's going to play in goals. The assumption will be that it's Evan Comerford because he was the man before Cluxon came back.
But Evan Comerford's a while out of the picture now, considering
I think a lot
maybe 3 years, you could say. Obviously he's played league, but
I think there's a lot of footballers that were in the Dublin squad that would have had better inter-county careers, but for the fact that they were being kept out of the team by some of the greatest players of all time. And I think what you consider these lads' ability is kind of coloured by that. So in a weird way, I think there's so much sort of erosion or just those players moving on now. It's gotten to the stage where, even from a leadership point of view, like Conor O'Callaghan came in at the back end of the kind of Dublin kind of glory era. He's younger than those, the Paul Mannion and the Brian Fenton, that kind of brigade. So, you'd imagine you'd see players just kind of standing up a little bit more and taking on a bit more responsibility.
So there's a lot of big question marks there, but huge potential. And what are you hearing about Brennan?
Nothing really, like Ger is... Ger is kind of that kind of St. Vincent set. He'd be pretty sort of hard in the way that he goes about it. Like, Ger is a sort of big enough personality as a person to be around, but I think when he gets into the management sphere, he'd be very honest with players. He'll tell them exactly what he thinks of them. There won't be people left in kind of 2 minds or trying to second guess the management. But obviously, a lot of it's going to come back down to coaching. That was a big question with Dublin for the last few years. Who's doing the coaching? Who's putting together the game plan? And in some ways, I think the strength of the Dublin talent was able to, keep Dublin at a very high level. It's going to be different now. They have to do better at the rules. They have to kind of get their best players back onto the pitch and playing in the right roles. So it'll be interesting to see what Dean Rock does. It'll be interesting to see exactly what it is that Stephen Cluxton is doing. I don't think, they still have a goalkeeping coach. That's not Stephen Cluxton. So he's there in some capacity. So I think Brennan is a good figurehead for the overall operation, but he will only be as good as the kind of coaches underneath him, if you want to look at it like that.